Hey, just a disclaimer that it was raining pretty heavily when we recorded this episode, so you might hear a bit of static in the background. Enjoy part 2. This is part 2 of our episode with Jieh-Yung. We hear about Jieh-Yung's insights into what the future holds for Asian Australians, his mission behind the Centre for Asian Australian Leadership, aka CAL, and Jieh-Yung gives us some words of wisdom for other Asian Australians looking to lead or do more in their own communities. If you haven't already, make sure you jump over to part 1 first before you tune into this episode. Enjoy!
Because I think, and to Lee, who just won the award, congratulations to her, she mentioned to us many, many times, both on and off camera, it's like, Asians spend a lot of time getting themselves to the table and now we're at the table and we actually want to be part of the decision-making process. And I think this is a lot about what CAL's doing as well. So are you able to sort of summarize or just sort of describe, what the mission and what CAL does and how you're sort of involved in this whole process?
CAL's role is very simple. The mission is very simple. Aligning with the ANU's mandate as our national university, the only national university. So special plug to ANU. So the national university. CAL's mission is very simple and straightforward, is to address this serious underrepresentation of Asian Australians in senior leadership positions across our public institutions and private sector corporations, whether it's, executive boardrooms, whether it's, town halls and parliaments, whether it's the media, whether it's higher education. It's real, or whether it's a sporting field, like representing Australia in the Olympics or, international sporting competitions. It's really about that national movement of living up to our mantra as a multicultural country. And we can't actually call ourselves the most successful multicultural country when our institutions don't reflect that. So I think that's the really big driver for CAL. And ANU's, mandate as the national university is to create public change, positive change using evidence-based research through academia, and through public policy impact. And so I'm very blessed and very lucky and fortunate that ANU sees this as a national mission, because alongside other areas of diversity like gender equity, like Indigenous and First Nations, Asian Australians and cultural diversity should be at that level as well as a national priority, because it is about defining or redefining or rebranding Australia in terms of what it is, and our place in the world, not just who we are internally, not actually coming into acceptance of who we are as a country now. I think we talked about it last night. Nearly 18% of the Australian population has an Asian heritage. That's nearly 1 out of 5. One out of 5 Australians has an Asian heritage, which is pretty huge. So it's really about reshaping and redefining who we are as a country and finding our place in the world. So I think I see CAL's mission as a national mission, and it's an objective that I think would live beyond me. There are people that would, come along and push forward and would take it to new heights, which I'm looking forward to at the moment. In terms of as CAL grows, as our sort of, our reach, our sort of staffing and our resources are continuing to grow, I'm certainly hoping that others could take the mantle, that I don't have to be the one.
Yeah, you can't do it alone.
I can't do it alone.
Yeah.
And, and I've been described, very, very humbly, and I'm very humbled by what people say as the heart and soul of the Asian Australian movement. Very blessed.
And I tend to agree, yeah.
You're embarrassed. You're putting me in a very hard
I was like, you talk about the Captain America thing, outside being not 6'4", but certainly I think as a leader, sort of in the Asian Australian space, I think a lot of people turn their heads towards you, partly because of, again, that prolificness and how vocal you are, but you also got the backing of, an institution that understands some of the issues that we seem to have in this country in general, right? So
and I think I think I said earlier on in our conversation that I had aspirations to go to ANU, right? So because I wanted to be a diplomat, but now working there is something else.
It's funny how things come.
It's funny how you are. I'm a Melbourne grad. I'm proud to be a Melbourne grad, but I feel very loyal to ANU because I spent there. I was there longer than I was at Melbourne, But you're right. Having that backing of a national institution, having the support of, our Vice Chancellor. Like, that's the other thing about CAL. I'm very blessed because we're sitting in the Vice Chancellor's portfolio. So we get that, I call the Vice Chancellor's portfolio like the Queen's hive, it's the hive, it's the beating heart of the university. And being a part of that means that we are at that level where we could work across the university and make this a priority. And, ANU is doing amazing things around gender equality with the global women's leadership, Global Institute of Women's Leadership, Jieh-Yung, affectionately called Jieh-Yung. Then we've got the First Nations portfolio looking at Indigenous reconciliation and Indigenous empowerment. And then third, you've got Cal. So there's a nice sort of suite of diversity and inclusion initiatives that ANU is hoping to be the gold standard for. And also, I always tell people, out of the 4 pillars of ANU, equity, inclusion, and diversity is one of the pillars, and to have that front and center and to have Cal a part of that, I think it's, we are on our way. So, and, the job's not done yet. We still have a long way to go, but these national conversations are happening, and I recognize it's more than me. There are people everywhere that are doing this, allies, sponsors, mentors, people who come on your podcast, the people that you've interviewed and you've chatted to, the amazing things they're doing. Everybody's doing their bit. And maybe in our lifetime, we can be the country that we aspire to be, the most successful multicultural country within our community at the grassroots, but also at that top level.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of countries, particularly when they put on the big brand marketing campaigns, always talk about how we're a multicultural country. And I think it's a lot of again, chest beating. And it's more around sort of what we like to believe, I guess, society to be, particularly with the whole multiculturalism thing. You see it probably with the US as well. The UK, they talk about it, specifically more London, and how these are all multicultural cities. But I think, without getting into the technicalities and definitions of multiculturalism, I think it's like you said, it has to be on a grassroots level. Like you should be able to, at least in my eyes, bit like what we have now. And I think it's progressively getting better. I think back to, I was born in late 80s, early 90s, and, just like Geelong now, you can get bubble tea, the prolificness of Asianness just around everywhere, particularly here in Sydney and down in, Melbourne as well. It's just ridiculous. If you think back to even 5 years ago, how different it is. I think that's, for me, a lot of that on at least sort of a superficial level in what you see visually. And then of course, from an institutional level with, what's happening with organizations and that sort of stuff, that we need to have more representation there as well.
It's like how they say when you grow up, you need to be able to see representation in the media, so then you can actually start to dream about all these different things and things that you can achieve as well in life.
Yeah, I mean, Lee Lin Chin was my go-to person back in the day. Back in the day, just the fact that, seeing her on television and then, but, when we're growing up, we didn't have a lot of role models, right? So that's why I watched a lot of Hong Kong drama, right? Watched a lot of Bruce Lee and, watched a lot of others. And then, and these things mean something, right? And then going back to the American example, Can, you and I, basketball fans, and, Vivian's coming along her way with basketball, the insanity. Yeah. What that meant, this skinny Asian kid from Harvard, who I think he was undrafted actually, coming in, and the coach, I think it was Mike Antoni of the New York Knicks, gave him a couple of minutes on the floor and he shined. And,
20 plus points.
Yeah, exactly.
On the Lakers.
Exactly. Exactly. And Madison Square Garden, and I can't imagine, I mean, the Knicks, a tragic team, right? In terms of where they've sort of gone, haven't had that boost since Patrick Ewing, right? In terms of the late 90s or the mid 90s, right? Having Asian faces attend games, holding signs, Linsanity, it means something, 100%. It means something,
I was at the Women's World Cup, Basketball World Cup game last week.
Right.
Telling Viv, right? And it was such a phenomenal experience because I was watching Australia versus China in the semi-finals. And I kid you not, it was 80% of the stadium or the arena was Chinese. It did not feel like an Aussie home game. And I think that is a really sort of encapsulates a lot about what we're talking about here, which is you don't realize just how heavy the Asian representation here is. On a statistical level, right?
It's funny you mentioned everyone.
It's funny you mentioned that, right? Because I went to an exhibition game, a friendly game. I think this was the men's basketball team between China and Australia in Melbourne, and same feel, right?
Yeah.
People coming in with banners and flags. I felt like I was in China, and this is again going back to what makes Australia great is they can do that. Free from judgment. I mean, there is judgment out there. There is a bit of negativity, which we're seeing, obviously, with the challenges around the bilateral relationship, and the challenges that is placed on Chinese Australians. But overall, they could be themselves. They could cheer for whoever they want to cheer for, you know. And I remember I was sitting there with a whole bunch of DFAT crew, funny how I wanted to be a diplomat and I hang around with DFAT people, with Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, for those who don't understand the acronym, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade people. And we're just like, we're just sitting there trying to be diplomatic, and it's like, who do we clap? I
felt that actually.
Like Deladova scores a bucket, and I'm like, oh yeah. And then like the Chinese center does this fadeaway turnaround, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay,
Play that, right?
You know what I mean? Like, and I literally, it was great. It was just that atmosphere, and I think that's where it goes back to our earlier point in our conversation. I can be Asian and I can be Australian.
Well, one of the other things that I know we've spoken about in the past is the importance of introspection as well, which is we shouldn't focus too much also on just pointing fingers and, sort of, I guess, making a fuss, so to speak, about, our lack of representation, let's say. And I think Asian Australians have a part to play, at least certainly from my personal experience, that I could have done probably a lot better, in some of my past careers and professional experience in terms of putting myself in a better position, right? It's not always maybe the judgment is based on race or anything like that. I think there are certain qualities that Asian Australians, and again, just generalizing here, self-limiting beliefs that cause us to not achieve, and that's why the bamboo ceiling exists and people talk about that. But, what's your take on introspection and what we should think about to give ourselves the best shot, in terms of being in better leadership positions and things like that?
I think it comes down to, eliminating self-doubt and eliminating, imposter syndrome, eliminating the think that we're not good enough, but also not having to conform, right? Because I think the problem I see right now is, go back to the Captain America analogy, people see that's leadership, right? And it's really about, for me, from my perspective, it's about washing all that away, right? That we can be ourselves, be authentic, right? I'm using a lot of A words here, right? Despite the fact that I'm not an Asian or a Besian. I'm a Besian. Being authentic. It's about being authentic, being comfortable about who we are. And I think this is why the Asian Australian movement is so interesting, because, it's always been around, right? The terminology has always been around, but it hasn't seen the momentum that I've seen over the last couple of years. I'm very humbled that I've had a part to play in this space. I'm very humbled that I've sort of supported people along the way that are now prominent champions of the cause, and for the people in the 40 under 40 are a great example, people who are now coming along the journey, pushing for that bigger change, not just in their professions, but also what the Asian Australian identity means, right? And, COVID obviously, dare I say, was a big impact as well, that people were starting to refer themselves as Asian Australian. So I get a lot of emails from people that write to me and say, hey, Jieh-Yung, I'm Asian Australian. I've never called myself that before. I am now, because there is an environment that could do that. I can comfortably call myself that without having people doubt me and without having people talking me down. So I think that regardless of how we progress, change is generational. It may not happen in our lifetime, but if there's one thing that we could be proud of, all of us, is that Asian Australian identity is not just alive and well, but it's going strong. The fact of the matter is that we're sitting here having a podcast calling Level Asian, leveling up. I love it. You know what I mean? It's about leveling up, you know? And the fact is you guys doing that, I know we talked about it when you were planning on launching it, and now you're doing it, right? You're creating this environment where we can actually have these conversations, but also having a fan base, a listener base who could actually, relate to, right? So I think it's about that. I think it's about, being authentic, being who you are, let's not go through what we went through as kids, thinking about dyeing our hair blonde or,
the conformity around that.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully that was a decent response to that question.
No, it was good. It was
a lot of big words there, Ken. So a lot of buzzwords.
A lot of big words. What do you feel like the future is going to look like for Asian Australians in our space that we've created or starting to create?
Oh, I'm hoping to see more of a consolidated identity. So in terms of what's happening in the US, for example, we see, they do that separation very well, Vivian. They separate being American and then being Asian American, right? So I think from my perspective, seeing that consolidation would be great. That we're starting to see more and more initiatives, like Level Asian podcast, Cal, maybe other entities that could spring up that supports the ecosystem and supports the community. But having that general understanding, that consolidated and mainstream understanding of what that identity means and what that label means, dare I say label. I'm a proud wearer of that label, you know, and we should all be, right? Because that's who we are. We're being authentic. We're being real and true to ourselves. So I'm hoping to see more and more people talk about it, more and more people share their experiences, and more people contributing to the ecosystem. And because we can't do it alone, you know, and anybody who's listening to this, who's, you know, following Little Asian Podcast, like I'm hoping they could also step up, you know, not just level up, but step up to actually be a part of that journey with us. And, you know, having that sense of belonging is also super important.
Yep.
That we can see ourselves in the Australian tapestry, you know, that we're not the outsiders. It is about being on the inside, but it's also being about the influences that could actually shape the direction of our country. We're getting there, not there yet, but that's what I'm hoping to see. Yeah. And that is that we as a country is known in the world as the most successful multicultural country, legitimately, not a marketing word or a buzzword, but something that we could actually live and breathe every day. And when people think of Australia, they think of multiculturalism, because I see that multiculturalism is not just a government policy. I see it as a quintessential Australian value, and it's something that Australia should be deeply proud of, and how it actually shapes our national identities. You know, the way I see it is, you know, proud to be having the world's oldest continuous civilization as our core part of our identity, you know, fueled by our cultural diversity, bringing those two elements together. And how do we support each other, and also, you know, taking this country forward to new heights. So that's what I'm hoping to see, and that we could be proud about, you know, calling ourselves Asian Australian, you know, without having second thoughts.
I definitely think like the younger generation has a louder voice now, because
I do too. Yeah, absolutely right. You know, Vivian, that's an important point, because like I think I mentioned earlier on that people are starting to use that. They're calling themselves that, and it's the younger generation that is really sort of turning the movement onto its own. Like old farts like me, you know, like, you know, sort of like, you know, has-beens in a way. Like some people, you know, like can't keep up with the way that how we're expressing ourselves, right? You know,
just like he couldn't get on the express train today.
No, exactly right. I saw a train, I jumped on it, right?
Whatever Lee said, she said go that direction.
I saw Parramatta, I jumped on it, right? So, but you know, like I think, you know, young people are, the way that they're messaging themselves, the way that they're actually branding themselves. I'm talking to experts around branding, right? So that's important, and that's one thing that I would say that Asian Australians don't do enough of, you know, in terms of investing in your professional brand and your personal brand. And sometimes you got to do a little bit of chest beating. I call it the peacock plumage effect. You know, sometimes you got to
fan it a little bit.
You got to fan your plumage a little bit. But I have a lot of optimism, because I think young people are doing that now, you know, and they're using different ways and very creative ways of doing it. I mean, we talked about it before. I'm only on LinkedIn, and that's enough for me. I am not attractive enough to go on Instagram. I'm not cool enough to go on TikTok and Facebook. And who's on Facebook these days? Who's on Facebook these days, right? So you know, but it's really about investing in that, you know. And I think young people in the next generation, they are very good at it. You know, they are expressing themselves in different ways and being creative, and also, you know, breaking through boundaries and barriers and thinking outside the box. And you know, and I'm loving what I'm seeing right now. You know, like what you guys are doing with Level Asian. You know what. I discovered there's a Korean dessert store in Melbourne. You know, they make the best.
Is it Scoopy?
Scoopy.
Scoopy. Big plug for Scoopy.
Yeah. Big plug for Scoopy. You know, like, you know, and there, and these things are happening, right? You know, and it's, you know, one day we might see, I don't know, a version of the Melbourne Club that's like, you know, an Asian club or something. You know, you know, where we sort of gather together, play mahjong and hot pot,
and not be judged for it.
Exactly. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. Like the sky's the limit, and I think that. But as long as we're comfortable in our own self-identity, I think we can break through. I think, you know, and I think what I want to tell young people and our young and aspirational and emerging leaders is, you don't have to conform. You don't have to be something that you're not. You know, if you're an introvert, you don't have to be an extrovert. You know, when you're an extrovert, you don't have to be an introvert. You know, you can actually be yourself and get ahead. That's what I want. And in answer to your earlier question, Vivian, what do I see in the future is I want that.
I mean, the comment I was going to make about, and I was actually going to talk about young people as well, which is, you know, even the subtle things. And I'm someone who just sees the details and things. I see a lot of, even if you look at people's Instagram handles, younger people, Asian Australians, they always have flag emojis. You know, it's always the Australian flag with whatever you know, Asian flag that they've got. I think these little subtle changes are generally sort of some of the catalysts that usually evolve into something bigger. And you sort of look at the big, you know, youth or political movements in history. As someone who studies history, most of that, a lot of that comes from youth.
Yes.
And I think youth is very powerful in the sense of, you know, and I sound old saying this now, but you know, like.
So Vivian's the only young one on this.
She's the only young one. That's right, with the old farts having a chat. But you know, like I think
it is. You're right.
Youth
Absolutely.
definitely is a big catalyst for this, and I think they're massive amplifiers. They're vocal, they're unapologetic, you know, with this sort of stuff, and sometimes I think us older people tend to go, you know, whatever, you know, we've been there, done that, we've tried it, doesn't work, and we have this narrative in our head, whereas, you know, young people actually are very ambitious about what it is that they want to do as well. But I do have a pointed question. Were you going to say something just now?
I was going to say, like, I love the reference to history, because if you look at all the major historical movements, they are driven by young people. All these ideologies that have come to be, that have turned from an ideology, an idea to an actual outcome, has been driven by young people. And even when I talk to young people now, right, and you know, the way that they sort of express themselves is so different, right? You know, they don't feel like they have to prove that they are Asian Australian. They just say it. And this is what I love about it, is that they're so proud of it. You know, you know, I am Asian Australian. What's your point? Or, you know, like, why is this a barrier? Or what are the issues? You know, and I say, oh, you know, bamboo ceiling is real. What bamboo ceiling? You know, like, you know what I mean? Like, and it's sort of like, and I love that. I love that energy, and I love that confidence, and we need it, because that's how we sort of chug ahead. That's how we push ahead. If we're always pessimistic, we
100%. I was thinking Lee Tran from Dropbox, and she actually reminded us that this is very early on in the race, in the sense that a lot, you know, if you think about the Italians and the first generation European migrants, and when they first came here, you know, they are now, you know, 4 or 5 generations in, and a fabric of, you know, Australian culture. And I think the Asians, you talk about generational as well, I think over the next coming generations, we're going to see a lot of that. So I'm super optimistic about the whole thing as well. And the question I was going to ask you, and this is a bit of like a left turn, what's your parents' opinion about what you're doing now? And then what is your wife's opinion about what you're doing now?
I think my parents have always been very supportive in terms of, again, you know, I think maybe we were a bit ahead of our time. In terms of, you don't have to be like a doctor or a lawyer. So I didn't get that from my parents. And I hear a lot from your other previous, you know, like guests, and they talk about that experience growing up, that parents had an expectation that either you're a doctor or a lawyer, or worse, if you can't do that, an engineer, right? Right? You know, worse if you can't do that. But my parents never had that. So my mum's always like, that's why she's a rock in my life. She's always like, go do what you want to do. And then, you know, and we also came from a family of public service. So, you know, we talked about starting off from my childhood and who I am, but now let me take you to a couple of generations back, right? Like my grandfather, so my mother's father was a soldier in the National Chinese Army back in the late 20s and early 30s, 1920s, 1930s. My great-grandfather, again from my mother's side, I've just realized that my father's side hasn't had many cool people. It's really my mum's side. I should be taking her surname, actually, not my dad. But my mum's grandfather, so my great grandfather, he participated in the Chinese Revolution, the first one, not the red one, but the original one, the OG one, in 1911. You know, overthrowing the Qing dynasty. So we've always had like, and you know, he met Sun Yat-sen, the founding father of modern China. So we've always had a sense of service, you know, in terms of like public service, regardless, and also creating progressive positive change and impact. So it's always been like,
it's been in the blood.
It's been in the blood in a way. So yeah, mum and dad never sort of like stopped me from doing that. But now there's always saying, every time they see me in the news or they're a bit more weary, they're like, oh, you know, they hate Chinese people at the moment. So because of the relationship with China, be careful, you know, like don't put yourself out there so much. Just do your job, you know, like
such an Asian
You know what I mean?
response.
But now I think if we didn't have the tensions with the bilateral relationship, if the rise of China and the way that we are managing the relationship, if that was done better, maybe they would not have said that. But now, obviously, it's a bit difficult, and you know, we don't want to signal out Asian Australians, obviously, because they're so diverse, right? But then for Chinese Australians in particular, I think, you know, obviously that sort of geopolitical impact has had a major role in sort of their sense of belonging in Australia. So now they're like, just can you please just not say anything, or, you know, don't talk about China? But I'm not. I'm talking about Asian Australian representation. Oh, okay. So they just think that I'm talking about China. So, but I think, you know, they're very supportive. They like the fact that I work at a university, that I'm not, but I'm not a professor. So I'm like, sorry, Mum, I'm not a professor. No, but you know, because the Asian culture has so much respect for education. It's sort of like, you know, it was a great place to be. So they're very supportive. So as for my wife, I think she's very different. Her and I, we're very different people. She is the actual Asian. So she's very good at maths. She's very good at like numbers and all the technical stuff. And I'm just hopeless at that. So we are a great match. And she grounds me. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like she was looking at photos about the awards last night. You know, it's all over social media now. And she's like, why are you not up there? And I'm like, oh, that's all right. I'm just doing the back and just doing, you know, making sure that the thing doesn't fall apart. No, you should be up there. And I'm like, you know, she was so blunt, right? She was texting me this morning, you know, and yeah, so why are you not up there?
That was what that phone call was about as well.
No, but she's very different. So I think, you know, she doesn't fully understand it, but at the same time, she's very supportive. So, and, you know, and she sort of reminds me that, you know, when I had that moment, you know, I shared on LinkedIn in terms of like the difficulties of actually being the torchbearer, and, you know, and then I thank you both for reaching out and reminding me that I'm not the only one doing this, right? And I remember she said to me, she's like, you know what, is it worth it? Is it worth all this? You know, and I say, yeah, I think it is, you know, for Hopeland, my daughter, for future generations of Asian Australians, yeah, it is worth it. But she's like, you know, remember self-care. So she's always sort of like, yeah, the reminder.
She's that sort of balancing act.
She's the balance. I think she injects, I'm not sure whether you guys have picked up in our conversation, but I don't have much logic, right? So I go from A to Z to B to D to C, right? But she's highly logical. So she sort of grounds me and gives me that sort of, she gives me that logic that I don't have. So, and I think we need that sometimes. So, and I recognize my weaknesses. I recognize my gaps, and I think that's a big part of leadership also, is to understand that what you're good at, what you're not good at, and being comfortable about that. You can't do everything. But for her, I think she sort of like fills in those slots that I don't have. So, you know, she's just amazed that I'm able to turn this into a center, like, you know, and turn my passion into an actual center.
But she also, whilst you may not outright say it because it may not come to your head, but, you know, I think Davey puts a lot of big importance on this, is the support of your partner, whether it's your wife, your boyfriend, whoever, right? And that is that they give you permission to allow you to do what you do, because you are in a position that is highly, I wouldn't say scrutinized, but it's under the microscope of the spotlight a fair bit. And you have to be on pretty much a lot of the time. And so if you don't have that block in the family environment, it makes it incredibly difficult to be able to juggle what you do and still be able to have a very harmonious life, you know.
And this is probably like one of my, and can't sort of cut you off because I had a thought bubble.
No, go for it.
It really related to that point, because I'm not very good at switching off. So, you know, you pointed that out. Like, I'm always on, right? The on switch is always on. There's no hardly the off switch goes on. So, and she sort of reminds me all the time that when you're at home, please don't work. But sometimes you can't help it, right? Because you're always wanting to like catch up, or you're wanting to answer that email or that phone call or that text. And she's always like, just don't, right? Just don't work. And she's very good at it. She's able to separate work and home very well, and I'm not very good at it. So I it's all sort of mixed up in my head. So I appreciate the fact that she does remind me of that. But at the same time, you know, they do give you permission and that privilege and that opportunity to be involved and do what you want to do. But a big decision for me not to pursue politics, because I think we talked about, I was part of my early on in my career, I was a local government councillor. I was elected very young. I was 23. So I spent my 20s in politics, and people say, why do you never take a holiday? I couldn't. I have an obligation to
You're on a
represent
mission,
I need to represent my community, and when you take a holiday and you don't answer phone calls, people get stressed out and people want help, and I just didn't want to do that to people. So so I spent my 20s pretty much like as a local politician, as a local councillor. And one of the reasons why I decided not to go higher is she didn't want me to. So she's sort of like, I don't want our lives to be in the spotlight. And I respect that. So I was, I had desires to be an MP, because again, once you got a taste of local government or politics, there are things that you've done and you wanted to actually take it further, right? There are only certain things that you can do in local government, and you're thinking, you know what, I can take it to the next level.
You really outgrow it.
Yeah, no, you outgrow it. It's like a business. You outgrow it. You move on to a bigger pond or a bigger lake or a bigger river. But she told me straight out, she's like, no, I don't want this, I don't want our lives to be in the public scope. You can create change elsewhere. You don't have to be in politics. And I respect that. And I actually, had the conversation internally within myself to actually lock that away internally. And that was a big part of me, right? Again, going back to the conversation about acceptance, about recognition, about serving the community, because when you serve your community, when you serve your country, that's also a form of recognition and acceptance in terms of enhancing your belonging. So it was a big part of me, and I wanted to do that. And out of the love and respect for her, and I just locked it away, and it's still locked away. So people always ask me, do you want to go back to politics? I say no, because I've sort of put that aside. I've sort of moved on from life. But then, the other day my wife said to me, oh yeah, maybe when you're 50 or 60, when Hopeland's all grown up. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't have energy for that anymore. You know what I mean? But maybe I don't know, she's come around a little bit, but but yeah, no, it's locked away. It's sort of but I know that we can actually create more change, or even not more change, but actually create change. Yep. You don't have to be in politics for it. But that doesn't stop me from supporting people who want to be in politics. Yep. And I've got that sort of track record in doing that.
But I think the lesson is also that whatever you're doing, whatever I'm doing, whatever everyone else is doing, there's imperfection in what it is that we're doing. I think we're all sort of figuring it out as we go. And I think there's we might on a surface level seem like we know exactly where we're going, what we're doing and how we're going to go about it. But I think a lot of that is, it's like a duck paddling, sort of frantically underwater. We look very calm on the surface, but there's a lot of franticness, so to speak, underneath.
Well, no, I never thought that I would become the founding director of CAL and being a director of a research institute without a PhD. Didn't expect that, you know what I mean? So you're right. I think sometimes you don't know where life takes you, and you don't know where your career takes you, and you know what opportunities lies ahead. But, I've always been somebody who wants to do different things. As I mentioned, I worked in not-for-profit, I worked in sport, entrepreneurship, government, politics, events management. I've done a whole bunch of things, and I just feel like I wanted to continue with that. I'm keen to do, I'm keen to move into venture capital. That's my next goal at the moment. I'm keen to, in the future, if venture capital does well, in terms of that goes well, I'm keen to do philanthropy. I want to give back. I want to be in a position where right now, a big part of my role at CAL is to get donations from donors. I want to be on the giving end rather than the asking end. You know what I mean? I want to be able to do that. So yeah, I mean, politics, maybe, I don't know, but it's always been at the back of my mind, and people always say, you've got a natural knack for it. If you want to create change, it's always in politics. And sometimes my mentors and sponsors remind me of that. Right? They're like, politics, public policy. That's where the real change happens. That's where you shift the country in terms of where it goes. But then I look at what we do now, and I look at what you guys are doing and what everyone else around me is doing. It's not the only avenue anymore. The world has changed.
I think so. And I think, just drawing from someone like Gary Vee, sort of very prolific in the branding and the marketing scene, which is a world that I'm sort of involved in. And he says some of the biggest things that win now is nostalgia, brand, tribalism. This is why he's so bullish on hip hop. Hip hop is just tribalism, and it sort of permeates across cultures and, race and all sorts of things, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
And, one of the biggest things that we thought about with, even Level Asian and everything that we're doing, and Viv reminds me of it, partly because she's younger, but also it's that.
and more
just more trendy and,
picture thinking, thinking outside the box.
Exactly. And, just how do we engage particularly younger people, you know, and this is not a go out, you know, yet last night and everything like that, but it was a different crowd.
Different crowd.
You know,
Absolutely,
and so everyone plays the different pockets as to what's happening.
No,
and,
absolutely.
You know, you need to include everyone where we can, and I think we're all just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and this is again, you know, proving how old I am, right? And also not thinking outside the box. People are like, "Where's the after party? Where's the hot pot? Where's the karaoke?" And I'm like, "Oh, I didn't think about that."
Do you know what? You should go find a den with mahjong and then just that would be the best.
That's my dream. That's my dream. My dream, I reckon, is to like buy a nice piece of property in the middle of Sydney or Melbourne and just create this mahjong den, right? Like where, you know, we can come in and say, "Oh yeah, you know." So, you know, who's going to be the next CEO of Telstra? Yeah, because that's what that's what those clubs do. That's what, you know, those are the you know, the string pullers. You know, those are the big dogs that actually can influence, right? We want to be in that position too. You know, like we want to be in a position where we can back our own, but also supporting others as well, and say, yeah, and then, you know, let's play that too.
Literally and figuratively building your own house, right?
Well, literally, yeah, exactly right. You know, like, why can't we, like, you know, all hang around in a mahjong den and actually have hot pot?
You know, the other question I really wanted to ask was, who and what are you most excited about, you know, in the coming years? Like Yasmin Poole, someone who comes to mind all the time. And I think there's definitely a lot of focus on what she's doing there. But, you know, besides her, who you sort of, if you were like, if someone came to Jieh-Yung and went, all right, Jieh-Yung, if I wanted to understand what was happening in the landscape of what you're doing now, what are you most excited about?
Oh, that's a hard question, because I mean, I'm just going back to 40 under 40, thinking about the awardees, you know, as a starting point, right? And there's also not even the 160 awardees that have now been awarded since the awards establishment, but also the hidden gems that we don't know out there, right? I mean, I always tell people that, you know, I'm a door opener. That's what I do. I'm not there to, you know, I can open the door for you, but if you can't stay in the room, I can't help you. You know what I mean? Like, so I think with Yasmin, she's living proof that, yeah, I was very privileged and to break down some barriers and open some doors for her, but she's thrived. That's all her. What she's been able to achieve right now. Yeah, she grabbed it with two hands. She's, you know, thinking about Yasmin, you know, in the area of politics and, you know, and public policy. You think about, you know, obviously the big names, right? You know, the existing names like Melanie Perkins, you know, with Canva, right? But then, you know, one of our judges, Vu Tran, the co-founder of Go One, you know, one of our emerging unicorns, right? Oh, there's so many. Like it's hard to go through them all, but and that's the thing, is that there are so many hidden gems out there that we haven't discovered, we haven't unearthed. Sorry about the gems analogy and the rocks analogy and the geology analogy, but it's about unearthing hidden gems, and these hidden gems deserve to be. They're already polished, in my view. It's just unearthing them. We don't have to polish them.
I know that you mentioned some bit of advice for younger people, but I guess any parting words or other advice for people looking into getting into something similar to you, or looking to make an impact or positive change for themselves and for everyone else?
Don't underestimate the ability of networking. I think, you know, sometimes I feel like we don't do it enough as Asian Australians. But it's also not about how many people you know, it's who you know and who knows you, right? And I think that investing time in those networks is critical. I would also say to young people or those who are aspiring to sort of do what we're doing and what you guys are doing and others, is to don't be afraid. Just ask, you know, like, and just reach out to people. And I'm really like lucky that people do reach out and say, hey, I've got this problem, can you help? Or I want to do this, can I run this idea by you? Like, and that's great. And to keep that up, I think it's important that, you know, ask for help when you need it, ask for advice when you need it, and ask for opinions when you need it. But also to, be authentic, be who you are. You know, don't ever doubt that. Don't ever doubt your place in this country. Sometimes we're all driven by self-interest, and I get that. And I think sometimes it's thinking beyond that as well, is to, look beyond that. How do you actually support somebody? And, you know, don't be so hard on yourself, right? Change takes a long time, but also don't lose focus, I think. I think, you know, it's hard. You know, you start, whatever you want to start something, right? Starting a movement, starting a business, creating an idea, seeing it through. It's hard, and you got to have that patience and consistency. And I think that's what I shared with the both of you, right? Talking about Level Asian, right? You know, and running a podcast I think it's tough. I admire the both of you for doing it, creating that environment, but also it's that consistency that would actually get you to that next level.
Yeah,
I agree.
That's important, powerful.
Yeah. And, and I haven't forgotten, but I do want to know
The name?
the meaning behind your name.
So my name, for those who don't understand Chinese, I apologize. So Jieh-Yung is Cantonese and Jieh-Yung is Mandarin. So Jie is Jie Shao, so introduced, right?
Okay.
And Yung is there was actually an emperor named after Yung, and he was a pretty good one. But Yung, really, the meaning is actually generosity, but also thinking about the bigger picture. Don't let the little things bog you down. I must admit, there are often times that I don't live up to that, because sometimes little things can shake you.
As do all of us.
As do all of us, as you say. Thank you. As you right back at you. It's true. We will get shaken. Every now and then. But the name that it's actually my mum that gave me the name. She picked the characters. My dad actually wanted to call me Jie Shi, which is Chiang Kai-shek, that character.
Oh,
Jie
okay.
Shi, right? And my mum's like, that's a dumb idea. She must have foreseen something, right? That was a dumb idea.
JY, look, appreciate you coming on the show. Came all the way up from Melbourne. I was saying to Viv, you're more elusive than a rare Pokemon.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad we finally had the master board to catch JY to come on the show. So I appreciate you coming on.
I'm not sure whether now you're starting on another analogy, right? Big fan of Pokemon. Love Pokemon, and and I think the great thing about this podcast is, the opportunity just to talk about these things, right? We're not just talking about the issues, but talking about who. That's the great thing about, Level Asian, and what I love about it is that, you dive into not just, the achievements of the guests that you bring on, but also what makes them tick, right? And, Pokemon was a big part of it for me. I still play Pokemon Go, despite people who don't play it anymore. I think my alias is Asian Oz 85, right? So if you find Asian Oz 85 for our listeners, add me, right? Asian Oz 85. So, but no, it's great. It's a real pleasure. I'm a big fan, and I look forward to fanboying you guys, fangirling you guys for many more years to come. And I look forward to seeing this, going to the next level.
Appreciate it.
Pun intended.
No, I appreciate it.
Next level, not just for Asian Australians, but for the podcast.
That's it, exactly. And thank you so much. And I think there's an opportunity, for a round two at some stage. And we have some plans. We're supposed to go down to Melbourne. We'll track down this elusive Pokemon called JYL, and then we'll go from there. But I appreciate you coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Real pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Level Asian podcast. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed the episode. And why not share it with friends and family who might enjoy it too? Also, make sure you head over to levelasianpodcast.com to join our email list and to receive the latest updates and get notified when the next episode drops. If you know a great guest we should feature, email us at contact@levelasianpodcast.com or DM us on our socials in the show notes. Catch you on the next episode.